If you had seen me 10 years ago, you would not have called me weak, and you definitely would not have imagined me lying alone in a hospital bed, being discussed like an inconvenience. 10 years ago, I was a woman who believed sacrifice was love. I believed that if I gave enough, if I stayed quiet enough, if I endured long enough, I would be cherished. I was wrong, but it took me 10 long years to understand that. I became a single mother when my son was 6. His father didn't die. He didn't get sick. He didn't disappear overnight. He simply woke up one morning, packed a bag, and said, "This life isn't for me anymore." And just like that, I was alone with a child who looked up at me with fear in his eyes. From that day on, I became everything. I was the one who woke him up for school, the one who packed his lunch, the one who sat beside his bed when he had nightmares. I was also the one who worked late nights, the one who skipped meals, the one who smiled even when my feet hurt so badly I could barely stand. I told myself, he didn't ask to be born into this situation, so I never complained. There were nights when I cried quietly in the bathroom, so he wouldn't hear me. There were days when I chose between paying bills and buying groceries. I learned how to stretch a dollar, how to turn leftovers into meals, how to turn exhaustion into motivation. Every sacrifice had a purpose. When he won an award at school, I felt like I had won it myself. When he smiled, my pain felt lighter. People used to tell me, "You're such a strong woman." I smiled and said thank you. But strength, I learned later, can become a prison if no one ever asks how you're really doing. When my son grew older, I thought things would finally slow down. I thought, I've done my part. Now it's my turn to breathe. But adulthood brought new needs. College tuition letters arrived in the mail. He looked at me with hope in his eyes and said, "Mom, I don't know how I'll afford this." So I figured it out. I took extra shifts, used my savings, signed papers I barely understood, because that's what mothers do. Or so I thought. After college came student loans, then rent problems, then career struggles. Every time life knocked him down, he landed on me. Just for a little while, he'd say, "I'll pay you back." I never asked when. Then he got married. I was happy for him, truly. I helped with the wedding, paid for things I couldn't afford, smiled through the stress. When his wife got pregnant, I was overjoyed. I didn't know that joy would come with a price. That's when my role quietly changed. I wasn't just his mother anymore. I became the babysitter, the emergency fund, the problem solver. I watched my grandchildren every weekend, sometimes all week. No pay, no thanks, just expectations. If I hesitated, I felt guilty. If I said yes, it was never enough. During those years, my own life disappeared. Friends stopped calling because I was always busy. Trips were canceled, dreams postponed. I ignored doctor appointments, telling myself I'd go next month. I told myself, once things settle down, I'll live. But things never settled. Slowly, something changed. Not overnight. Quietly, phone calls became transactional. "Can you watch the kids? Can you help with money? Can you handle this?" No one asked, "How are you?" At family gatherings, I felt like furniture, present, useful, unnoticed. Still, I stayed because I believed loyalty would be rewarded. I believed love would come back around. I believed my time would come. I didn't know yet that the moment I would need them most would be the moment they decided I was no longer worth the effort. 10 years passed like that, not because I had no dreams, but because every time I tried to move forward, someone needed something from me. And every time, I told myself, just a little longer. I believed patience was love. I believed endurance meant loyalty. What I didn't realize was this. While I was standing still, everyone else was moving on. My body tried to warn me. It started quietly. Fatigue that sleep didn't fix. Headaches that stayed longer than they should. A tightness in my chest I pretended not to notice. People told me to see a doctor. I smiled and said I was fine. I always had an excuse. The kids needed me. My son was stressed. There was no time. I treated my body the same way my family treated me, like something that would keep working, no matter how much it was used. Then one morning, my body finally refused. I remember standing in the kitchen. When the room started spinning, my heart raced. My legs felt weak. I told myself to sit down, to breathe. The next thing I remember was bright lights and unfamiliar voices. I was in a hospital. Doctors spoke in calm, careful tones. Words like tests and monitoring filled the air. I was scared, not just of dying, but of being alone. I believed this would be the moment my son would step up. After all, I had been there for every crisis in his life. I imagined him sitting beside my bed, holding my hand, telling me everything would be okay. Instead, he looked uncomfortable. He checked his phone often, answered messages, sighed like he was late for something. I told myself he was tired. I made excuses for him, the way I always had. On the third day, after the doctor stepped out of the room, my son finally spoke. "Mom, we should start thinking about the future," he said. "Maybe a nursing home would be more convenient." Convenient. That word stayed with me. I looked at him, waiting for concern, for hesitation, for love. None came. He didn't say he was worried. He didn't say he would take care of me. He talked about costs and availability. In that moment, I understood something painful. My illness wasn't breaking his heart. It was disrupting his routine. Lying there, weak and tired, I felt smaller than I ever had before. Not because I was sick, but because my value had changed. I was no longer the helper. I was the one who needed help. And that changed everything. After that conversation, visits became shorter. His wife came once. She stood near the door and smiled politely. They talked quietly in corners, stopped when I entered the room. I wasn't part of decisions anymore. I was informed. One afternoon, I pretended to be asleep. I heard my son's voice. "Once she's settled somewhere, we'll need to figure out the house." His wife replied, "And the savings? We should talk to someone." They spoke calmly, practically, as if I wasn't a person, as if I was paperwork. That night, I cried silently. I thought about every sacrifice, every dollar, every year, and I asked myself a question I had never allowed myself to ask before. Was I ever loved? Or just useful? I started doing the math. College tuition, rent help, wedding expenses, childcare, more than $60,000. But the real cost wasn't money. It was my health, my time, my identity. Hospitals are loud during the day. At night, they are painfully quiet. I stared at the ceiling and wondered, if I died there, who would really miss me? Not who would arrange things, but who would mourn me? When the doctor said I could go home, my son looked relieved. Not happy, relieved. He talked again about options, about planning. I nodded and listened, but something inside me had already changed. That night, alone in my house, I looked around at the life I had built. Every room carried memories of sacrifice, and I finally asked myself the truth. What happens if I keep living like this? The answer frightened me. I would disappear completely. That was the night I made a quiet promise to myself. I didn't know exactly how, I didn't know exactly when, but I knew this. I would never again allow my worth to be measured by my usefulness. The woman who entered that hospital believed sacrifice was love. The woman who left was beginning to understand the truth. When I returned home from the hospital, everything looked the same. The same walls, the same furniture, the same photographs smiling back at me. But I was not the same woman who had left. For the first time in years, the house was quiet. No children running through the halls. No phone ringing with urgent requests. No one asking what I could do for them. Just silence. And in that silence, I finally heard my own thoughts. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had paid bills late at night, and convinced myself that everything would be worth it. And I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for years. Who am I? When I stopped giving, the thought frightened me. For so long, my identity had been built on sacrifice. If I stopped giving, would I still matter to anyone? Over the next few days, I replayed my life like a movie. Every time my son struggled, I stepped in. Every time he succeeded, I supported him from the shadows. But when I was tired, when I was sick, when I was afraid, I handled it alone. That's when I finally saw the pattern. My love had been unconditional. His had come with expectations. The phone rang 3 days later. It was my son. "Mom, we need help this weekend. Can you watch the kids?" For 10 years, my answer would have been automatic. Yes. This time, I paused. "I'm still recovering," I said softly. "I need to rest." There was a brief silence, then disappointment. "Well, we'll figure something out," he said. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't say he hoped I felt better. The call ended. I sat there, waiting for the guilt to hit me. It never did. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Relief. I realized guilt had been the chain that kept me obedient. As long as I felt guilty, I kept saying yes. But guilt only works when you believe you're doing something wrong. And resting was not wrong. A week later, I scheduled an appointment with a financial advisor. I had never done that before. Money decisions in my life had always been emergencies, never planning, never protection. As I laid out my finances, the advisor looked at me and said, "You've been supporting more than one household." The words landed heavily. I had been financing my own exhaustion. I went home and opened an envelope I hadn't looked at in years. My will. I had written it with blind trust, believing love would protect me. It hadn't, so I changed it. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of clarity. I secured my future. For the first time, my resources had a purpose. Me. My son found out 2 weeks later. He didn't ask gently. He confronted me. "What's going on with you?" he said. "You've changed." "Yes," I replied. "I have." I told him I was taking care of myself now. He frowned. "After everything I've done for you?" he asked. The words shocked me. After everything he had done for me? I took a deep breath. "After everything I've done for you," I said calmly. "I'm finally choosing myself." He didn't apologize. He got angry. "You're being selfish," he said. "You're thinking only about yourself." For years, I had been everything but selfish. And now, the moment I set boundaries, I was the villain. That's when I understood something important. People who benefit from your sacrifice will always call your boundaries selfish. That night, I cried again, but not from heartbreak, from release. I wasn't mourning the son I had. I was mourning the son I thought I had. Calls became less frequent. Messages stopped. Holidays passed quietly. At first, the silence hurt. Then it healed. I realized I had been carrying the relationship alone. When I put it down, it collapsed. Weeks passed. Then months. I started doing small things for myself. Morning walks, books I never had time to read, meals I actually enjoyed. I visited a senior community, not because I was forced, because I was curious. For the first time, my choices felt like choices. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in a window. I looked older, but I also looked lighter. And for the first time in years, I recognized myself. I finally accepted a truth many parents never want to face. You can raise someone with love and still be left behind. That doesn't mean you failed. It means the relationship changed, and I refused to disappear with it. I didn't know what the future would look like, but I knew this. I would never again trade my dignity for conditional love. The first year of my new life was uncomfortable, not because I was lonely, but because I was learning how to exist without being needed. For decades, my worth had been measured by how much I gave away. Now, there was no one asking, and that silence forced me to confront myself. I learned that peace feels strange when you've lived in survival mode for too long. I woke up one morning and realized no one needed anything from me. And for the first time, that felt like freedom. I began to build a routine that belonged only to me. Slow mornings, sunlight through the window, coffee without rushing. I joined a local class. Nothing impressive, just something I enjoyed. Laughter returned to my life quietly, without permission, without guilt. One afternoon, I received a message. It was from my son. Short, careful, "Hope you're doing okay." I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally understood something. Love doesn't disappear, but it does change when it's no longer fed by sacrifice. I replied simply, "I am." That was enough. Months later, I saw my grandchildren again, not as an obligation, not as unpaid labor, as a grandmother. I laughed with them, listened to them, loved them. And when I left without exhaustion. I left whole. I stopped explaining myself to people who never asked how I was doing. I stopped apologizing for choosing rest. I stopped chasing appreciation from people who mistook my silence for consent. I learned that boundaries don't push the right people away. They reveal who was only there for what you provided. I stopped measuring love by how much pain I could endure. Real love does not require you to disappear. Years passed. I aged, but I aged honestly, with dignity, with calm, with self-respect. I became the woman I had postponed for decades. If you're listening to this and you feel tired in your bones, this is for you. If you've been giving and giving while quietly fading away, this is for you. You're not weak. for wanting peace. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. And you're not broken because someone couldn't love you without taking from you. Sometimes, the bravest thing you'll ever do is stop being available to people who only value you when you're useful. I didn't lose my family. I found myself. And that changed everything.